universal language, it will most likely be expressed in the realms of mathematics, geometry, energy patterns, and frequency. Could it be said that if there is ever to be such a thing as a true universal language, it will most likely be expressed in the realms of mathematics, geometry, energy patterns, and frequency? Could it be that this language, or at least the foundation of it, already exists here on Earth? Is it possible that over the course of thousands of years, we have been somehow guided in the process of creating this new form of communication? And if so, what type of information will be conveyed through it that could not be expressed any other way? In the search for answers, we must be prepared to trek through both time and space, to open our eyes and minds wide enough to notice compelling coincidences, and to stand back far enough to see if the building blocks of some kind of mathematical, spatial, frequency-based language emerge. But before we begin our journey, we will pause here in the present day to notice some of the ways that we measure and tabulate the world around us. This is an important step, for how we count and measure things can be as revealing as why we count them. First, we will take a look at the way we measure time. For all practical purposes, the smallest unit is 1 second, and we all know it takes 60 seconds to make a minute, and then 60 of these minutes to make an hour. This hour, of course, is the unit by which we divide our days, and these days become months, years, decades, centuries, and so on. Speaking of 60, let's take a moment to notice that all geometry, whether it is 2 or 3 dimensional, is also derived from base 60 mathematics that provide the foundation for a 360-degree circle, which in turn provides us with all the angles and formulas for creating virtually every shape known to humankind. Now let's look at how many cultures from all over the world have chosen to count and group things. Right away, we see that we have been attracted to the number 12, 12 eggs in a dozen, 12 months in a year, 12 inches in a foot, 12 signs of the zodiac. Strangely, whether it's tallying disciples or mythical gods, the number 12 appears often in the telling of our greatest stories about ourselves. And what about distance? Your local town might be measured in meters or other units, but when we talk about measuring our planet, the standards we all use revert back to base 60 units of miles, minutes, or geometrical degrees. Are you noticing the pattern here? We seem to be encountering a lot of 12s and 60s. Are they related? And if so, how? To answer that piece of the puzzle, we must travel roughly 5,000 years back in time to visit the ancient Sumerian culture of Mesopotamia, for here is where our 1260-based math comes from. This counting system, which was invented by the same people who produced the world's first written language, involved counting the knuckles of the 4 long fingers on one hand and then multiplying them by all 5 digits on the other hand. If you do this, you will get a maximum number of 12 knuckles times 5 fingers, which of course totals 60. How these cosmic jumps in language and mathematics occurred so suddenly is open to debate. But it is interesting to note that the ancient Sumerians themselves wrote about being given this information by sky god visitors they called the Anunnaki. Who and what the Anunnaki were is a hotly contested subject, but one thing that cannot be denied is the fact that over 5,000 years ago, a mathematical system was born that incredibly still serves us today. So now that we have our various units of measurement, all based on the Sumerian 1260 counting system, let's jump forward to a few pivotal moments in history and see what other numbers, patterns, and synchronicities appear. In the 6th century BC, on the Greek island of Samos, the famed mathematician Pythagoras led a school of thought that married philosophy, mathematics, music, and of course geometry. And while Pythagoras did not discover advanced geometry, he did apply it in new ways, especially to music. For instance, he noticed that when a tauten string was plucked, it would create a tone. And when that string was divided in half, it would make the same tone only twice as high in pitch. Pythagoras then came up with numerical ratios based on harmonic fifths, and this led to the creation of the musical scale found at the root of most modern music. It is important to note that according to Pythagoras, all musical notes were found by using mathematics, and as such were given number values according to their placement in a kind of master grid. For instance, by using fifths beginning from note number 1, he was eventually guided to note 27. And to find the same note twice as high in pitch, he simply kept doubling it to 54, 108, 216, 432, and and so on up the scale. If you've ever heard of Pythagorean tuning, you know that the number 432 is quite important. To Pythagoras himself, it probably wouldn't have stood out more than any other in his numerical grid. But in our quest to find a universal language based on mathematics and frequency, this particular note represents a significant piece of coincidental evidence. You see, many ancient musical instruments, from Tibetan bowls to Native American flutes, happen to produce the same tone, a tone that vibrates at 432 cycles per second. That's compelling, but even more intriguing is the fact that Pythagoras was not calculating vibration cycles to find tone 432. It just happens to be the same number. What's more, for decades, most modern musical instruments were also tuned to this same fourth octave A, with a value of 432 cycles. How could this be? Who chose this particular note as the keystone for instrument tuning, and more importantly, why? Here is where a deeper mystery begins to emerge, and to explore it, we will need to go back to Pythagoras' other passion, geometry. It is not an exaggeration to say that to Pythagoras and his disciples, geometry and math held a key to the nature of all life everywhere, and maybe it does. Let's look at the first four geometric shapes, the circle, triangle, square, and pentagon. In each of them are angles of degrees that, when added together, always total a specific number relative to that particular shape. For instance, if we take a triangle, the sum total of all three interior angles is always 180. For both the square and circle, it is 360. For a pentagon, it is 540. Now at this moment, let's step back and look at these numbers in a different way, as there seems to be something about them that reaches beyond a simple sum of angles. Did you notice that they happen to be in the same numerical neighborhood as tone 432? What's more, they all add up to 9, just like 432, 2160, the number expressed by both the cube and the germ of life pattern. You may have already noticed that without the 0, it is exactly half of our magic 432. That's worth noting. But what is even more intriguing is the way this number keeps showing up in other large-scale measurements. To discover one of these measurements, we will need to jump forward from Plato's time to when the Mayan civilization was flourishing. Roughly 1,500 years ago, Mayan stargazers were the most accomplished astronomers the world had ever known. Their concept of cyclical time led to many incredible discoveries: the accurate length of a year, the exact dates of seasonal changes, even the moments when solar and lunar eclipses would occur. But their most amazing discovery was of something known as the precession of the equinox, which makes note of a very slow wobble of Earth's axis. Somehow aware of the fact that this wobble takes 25,920 years to complete, the Mayans called this cycle one great year, with each of its 12 great months requiring 2160 Earth years to complete. And what about this? Did you know that the diameter of our moon, when measured in miles, also happens to total, you guessed it, 2160? Lastly, watch what happens when we apply simple division to this highly synchronous number. 2160 divided by 2 is 1080, the angle sum of the octagon. By 3, 720, the total of the hexagon. By 4, 540, the pentagon. By 5, are you ready? It's the ketone of 432. And by 6, 360, the number of both the square and circle. All F sharps and C sharps with our 432A thrown into the mix, as if it were some kind of clue to solving a cosmic riddle. Maybe we should look at this number even more closely. As we've stated, our closest celestial neighbor, the moon, is 2160 miles across, and 216 is exactly half of 432. What about the other large object in our sky? Were you aware that our sun is 864,000 miles across? Incredibly, where the moon's base number sequence is half of 432, the sun's number sequence is exactly twice 432. And do you know how many seconds there are in a day? 86,400, or 43,200 for the 12 hours of day, and 43,200 for the 12 hours of night. Or try this. Take the 360 degrees found in the circular shape of our sun and moon, and then multiply it by the 12 hours of either day or night. The answer, 4320. Or how about this? What is the only whole number that, when squared, comes to within 0.01% accuracy to measuring the speed of light? 432. What is going on here? We have all these different things: Earth cycles, time and celestial measurements, geometry, sonic frequency, yet they are all represented by the same numbers over and over again. To answer that, we must search for the factor common to all of them, and that common factor is the 5,000-year-old Sumerian 1260 counting system. It is what gave us the inches to a foot, the seconds to a minute, and the 360 degrees in geometry. It's almost as if the sky god visitors, who the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, provided humanity with a counting system that would lead to the discovery of these synchronicities. Could it be that the number 432 really is some kind of cosmic key that unlocks a language of higher understanding? And if so, have these sky visitors ever been back to make sure we don't miss the importance of the 432 matrix? One possible answer can be found in the story of a man named George Van Tassel, a respected aeronautical engineer who believed he was contacted by extraterrestrial beings in the early 1950s. During this encounter, Van Tassel said he was provided with a mathematical formula that could be used for everything from time travel to sound frequency healing, and which he used to build the world-famous Integratron near Joshua Tree, California. What is this formula? It is F equals 1 over T, or frequency equals one particular something divided by the number of time. Well, what if that one something was the biggest one on our planet, the one great year of 25,920 discovered by the Mayans? And what if the number for time was the most logical choice of 60? Suddenly, this mysterious equation is expressed as frequency equals 25,920 divided by 60. Are you ready for the answer? It's 432. Not only the frequency that instruments all of the world have been tuned to for thousands of years, but also the number that reveals the synchronistic nature of life on this planet. Noticing all these coincidences revealed by the 432 matrix and the Sumerian counting system, we must wonder if other ancient cultures were aware of them as well. Just scratching the surface, it would seem that they were. For example, let's take the Sumerian 12 and square it for a total of 144. Right off, we see that it is indeed a number and tone contained within our factor 9 grid. Expanding outward, we find 1440, then 144,000, which is a number that appears all over the world in the most compelling of ways. Take, for instance, the Great Pyramid of Giza. It happens to have been covered with 144,000 smooth white casing stones. To ancient Mayans, 144,000 days was the length of their 394-year back tune, a time cycle which has just begun again. In the Bible, we read that there will be 144,000 chosen ones redeemed from the earth prior to the apocalypse. Obviously, number sequences like these have been significant to many different cultures and religious sects, and to one enigmatic group in particular, the Freemasons. Were the earliest Masons, the supposed keepers of sacred information, also aware of the factor 9 grid, the 432 key, and the number 144,000? Their infatuation with the numbers 3 and 13 might be telling. For instance, if you divide 144,000 by 432, the answer is 333.3 into infinity. Or take a look at the back of a dollar bill. That famous unfinished pyramid could be revealing some interesting clues. For instance, there are 13 steps climbing the pyramid, and 13 times 33.3 is 432.9. Even the shape of the flat-topped pyramid appears to be made as if someone had drawn 4 dots in a line, then 3 above it, then 2 above that, and then connected those dots to reveal this iconic shape. And of course, let's not forget that the square root of our all-important factor 9 grid is 3 threes. Who else knew about 432? The answer is surprising. In India, large cycles of time are called Kali Yugas, and each one is 432,000 years long. In fact, the number 432 appears so often in sacred structures and myths, from Stonehenge to the pyramids, that author Joseph Campbell could not help but see it as the most important mythological number in history. So what do we have here? What is it that's trying to be expressed by all of these coincidences? One answer is that over the course of history, we have been somehow guided toward both the subconscious creation and eventual conscious recognition of a grand pattern based on frequency, mathematics, time, space, and geometry. Quite possibly, these synchronistic numbers, shapes, and tones represent the building blocks of a a language that we do not yet fully understand, but could turn out to be the most important language we will ever learn. How will we use it? Who will we be conversing with? Time will tell. Thousands of years ago, from locations all over the globe, various prophets, shamans, and seers described an era when humanity would make some kind of cosmic leap into a next level of consciousness. Here, at the dawning of the age of Aquarius and the start of a new Mayan Baktun cycle, maybe it's happening.